They say there are stations where time doesn't flow. It folds, where trains don't just cross cities but dimensions. This story begins at one of them. If you ever step onto the wrong platform, when the clock strikes 3:33 and the silence weighs heavier than concrete, you might see it. You might not come back. The air in Vanguardia station always smelled of ozone and cold, almost damp metal. But that night, the sensation was different. A subtle stench of sulfur mingled with the echo of empty tiles. Edward, a data archaeologist, shouldn't have been there. It was 2:37 a.m., and he was waiting for the last train on the Red Line, a service everyone knew existed only on paper at that hour. He was alone. Absolutely alone. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a sound, but its absence. The constant hum of the fluorescents, that electric lament that serves as the soundtrack of solitude in the subway, had gone silent. The only light came from a few dying amber bulbs that cast long, distorted shadows, like dancing figures on the opposite wall. Edward leaned against a worn concrete column. His black leather briefcase, full of confidential reports, felt heavy in his hand. He looked at his watch, a Swiss automatic model that never failed. 2:37 a.m. on the opposite wall, there was an old advertisement mural, a vibrant image of a smiling woman holding an outdated phone, promoting a model from at least 20 years ago. Edward shivered. His mind, trained to detect patterns in the chaos of information, registered the anomaly. He approached. There was something else. The woman's face in the mural was cracked, not vandalized, but split by a clean, precise fissure that didn't just tear the paper. It seemed to extend behind it, into the wall itself. As he passed his hand over it, he felt the paper was strangely cool, and the concrete beyond vibrated at a frequency so low, it was more a sensation in his chest than a sound. He looked at his watch again. 2:37 a.m. then. The track, dark and silent, came to life. A blinding light, white as a camera flash, appeared at the end of the tunnel. The train's rumble wasn't the usual metallic rhythm. It was a harsh roar, like fabric being torn. The train burst into the station. It wasn't the modern model he expected. It was an old rusted metal box with fog-dirty windows. The interior lights were dim and flickering, and the vehicle stopped with an agonizing screech. The doors opened with a hiss of compressed air. Inside, it was full, not of normal passengers, but of motionless silhouettes dressed in long coats and vintage hats. Their faces were in shadow, as if light couldn't touch them. All stared forward, into the tunnel, except one. A little girl, in a white dress stained with what looked like dried mud, stood by the doors. Her eyes were two pits of darkness. She didn't move, only raised a tiny finger and pointed at the cracked mural, right at the fissure's height. Edward felt a paralyzing terror. He looked at the mural. The crack had deepened, and from its center pulsed a purple light, like a contained lightning bolt. In that instant, the world broke. A silent scream filled the station. Not a scream of voice, but of reality itself. The platform twisted. The tiles beneath Edward's feet rose and fell. Not as if the earth trembled, but as if space itself were breathing. The girl on the train screamed, a shrill sound that tore the air, and the doors slammed shut. The train didn't move. The tearing noise intensified. The purple light from the mural exploded in a burst. Edward closed his eyes and shielded himself with the briefcase. When he opened them, the sulfur stench was gone, replaced by a familiar scent of cleaning products and cheap coffee. The fluorescent hum had returned, loud and irritating. He was alone. The rusted train had vanished. The platform was spotless. But his watch read 9:15 a.m. confused, dazed. He looked at the mural's location. No old poster, no crack, no purple light. There was a new digital ad, bright, promoting the latest smartphone. Edward felt the hairs on his neck stand up. A time jump wasn't possible unless... A group of passengers rushed workers and sleepy students, began descending the stairs. A young blonde woman approached him.
"Excuse me, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost,"
she said with a tired smile. Edward nodded, trying to breathe deeply. Yes, I just got disoriented. What time is it?" 9:15, she replied, checking her own watch.
"The 9:15 train should arrive any moment."
Edward felt a cold terror. The platform was full. The time was correct. Reality had returned to its course, but it wasn't his reality. He looked at the blonde woman. Something in her eyes made him hesitate. She reminded him of the girl from the train. At that moment, the lights flickered. The fluorescent hum broke for an instant, and in that shattered silence, the blonde woman spoke again. But her voice was no longer the same. It was spectral and dry.
You have to compensate for the shift, Edward.
She couldn't know his name. The blonde woman raised a hand to her face, and instead of skin, the palm touching her cheek was gray and dry. Her eyes, for a fleeting second, became the dark pits of the girl. The people around them kept talking, checking their phones, waiting for the train, completely unaware. They were there, but she wasn't. Edward understood. The crack in the mural wasn't just in the paper. It was a tear in reality at Vanguardia Station. And he hadn't traveled through time. He had jumped to a parallel reality, one where time and people were out of sync, and the cost of the jump was the balance of that new world. The modern train, a red line model Edward recognized, arrived at the station. It stopped with the usual hiss. The doors opened. Passengers began boarding, pushing him. The blonde woman, now back to her normal appearance, smiled. But that smile had a predatory edge.
Come on, get in. You don't want to be late for your new destination.
Edward hesitated. Boarding meant accepting that reality, following the path that new world had imposed. But staying meant facing an anomalous being, hiding in plain sight, awaiting a sacrifice. His gaze fell on his briefcase. It held the confidential reports he had worked so hard to obtain, documents about ancient technologies buried beneath the city. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a bundle of papers, and threw them onto the dark track. "I don't have to board," Edward said, his voice trembling but firm. The blonde woman stopped smiling. The gray skin reappeared on her face, spreading down her neck. She moved with unnatural speed, grabbing his arm. Her grip was like frozen iron.
You don't understand, Edward. The debt has already been paid.
As she spoke those words, a deafening roar came from the tunnel's depths, beyond the station. It was a scream of metal and fury. Edward felt a violent tug. The woman's grip was unbreakable. A whirlwind of cold air, with that horrible sulfur smell, filled the train car. He fought with all his strength. The other passengers, unfazed, pushed him with their shoulders and briefcases. The blonde woman clung to him, her face now a mask of terror and rage. In a final, desperate effort, Edward broke free, stumbling backward toward the concrete column he had touched earlier, and the blonde woman couldn't follow. She remained trapped at the train's threshold, staring at him with those dark eyes, as the convoy began to move.
Your return! You are the key!
Her dry voice screamed just before the doors shut with a snap. The train departed. The platform returned to calm, full of people waiting. Edward breathed, exhausted, leaning against the column. He was safe, or so he thought. Slowly, he looked at the column he had leaned on. There was a small, oxidized bronze plaque embedded in the cement. A plaque he hadn't noticed before. With his heart in his throat, he read the blurry inscription. Here fell the first stone of Vanguardia Station. Inauguration, 1907. Tribute to the Lost Girl, 1927. Edward closed his eyes and felt a knot in his stomach. When he opened them again, the plaque had vanished. The column was smooth and gray. But now, at his feet, there was something else. A small cylindrical metal object. It was the second hand of his Swiss watch. The second hand had come loose. Edward picked it up. He had escaped the ghost train, had rejected the debt in that parallel reality. He had returned, or so he believed. He looked around. People waited for the train. Everything seemed normal. And yet, as he passed by the modern digital ad, he noticed that in the exact spot where the crack had been in the old mural, a single pixel was off. A black dot, like a tiny hole in the bright reality, blinked in the shape of a minuscule eye, watching him from the digital matrix. Edward didn't wait any longer. He dropped the watch hand and the empty briefcase, and ran up the stairs, away from the depths of Vanguardia. He knew the station hadn't taken his life, but it had taken a part of his time, and the lost girl, guardian of that temporal vortex, was waiting for him at every unscheduled stop. He emerged onto the street under a sky that was an unnaturally vibrant blue, feeling the fresh morning air. His escape was over. For now, the true horror wasn't in the journey, but in the certainty that, although he had escaped the station now knew him, and on some train, at some hour, in some reality, the blonde woman would still be traveling, with her gray face and dark eyes, whispering his name.
Edward.
That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this content, you can support me with hit the like button and by subscribing to the channel. but be careful when you turn off the lights in your room. If you hear footsteps while you're alone, remember, some stories don't stay in the video. Good night.